Hey there, entrepreneur, and welcome to today's show. You are in for a treat. I am here with Brent Freeman, who is the founder and president at Stealth Venture Labs. He has co-founded 5 e-commerce brands. Damn, 5 folks. That's pretty crazy. And is the chairman of the board of the Bay Area chapter of the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship that teaches entrepreneurship to inner city kids. In his free time, he loves to travel to Italy, give back, and spend time with his family and friends. And this is a very cool fact that in 2020, he received the high honor to be knighted by the Italian royal family for his commitment to philanthropy and giving back. Damn, Brent. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I mean, let's dive right in. So here's
Sure.
the Resilient Entrepreneur. We're kicking things off a little bit differently. Up until, this season, I've been kind of just asking about people's background, but I want to know more about the adversity stuff. So can you tell us about a time that you faced adversity and maybe what tools that you overcame it? Because there's a lot of people who need that right now.
Oh, Michelle, we opening Pandora's box here. If the hand in glove relationship between entrepreneurship and adversity is it's one and the same. I have thousands of times of adversity that I have come up against and that I could share stories of. But I think the one that's most pertinent, that's kind of the biggest one that I have really started to put into a framework to try to help other entrepreneurs or even just people as they come up against really challenging times of either despair, depression, frustration, and kind of unclarity of what to go and where, what to do in their life. I about 5 years ago was going through a really challenging time in my life, personally, professionally. I mean, everything. It was just all out of balance, out of whack. I was going through a divorce. Married somebody who's a wonderful person, but wasn't the right fit for me. And I always told myself I would get married once. And, I had this program and this story in my mind. And when that shifted and made a hard left, it really took out the crumbling building blocks of my life, because I had all these mental models of building a family together and doing, and all these things. And it just the knees got taken out from underneath me. And then simultaneously, when I was building my business, I've been an entrepreneur for about 15 years, and I have failed my way to success in quotes, right? Because I don't ever think that I'm there. But failure has been this stepping stones for me failing forward. And at that same time, I was going through divorce. I found myself to be about 40 pounds overweight. My business was failing at the time. The business model that we had was no longer working. And I actually had all of the quote unquote things that were society tells us are success. I had the physical things and the car and the fancy apartment and the view and the accolades and Forbes and blah, blah, blah. But what I didn't have was the innate happiness that emanates from the inside out, because all of these programs that I had put into my mind from an early young age, all the way through till that point that I was living out, were crumbling before me. I had physical things, but they didn't bring the happiness. I had, of my own company and quote unquote freedom, but I was a free slave. And I was on the brink of another business failure, because I'd had several prior to that. And I found myself looking out my window one day in San Francisco. I lived in a high-rise apartment, thinking, would it be better if I just jump? Would it be better just end it all? And so when you're talking about adversity, when you're having a suicidal thought, adversity, you come up against that real quick when you start saying it'd be better to stop living this life than to continue forward. And, I saw in San Francisco, we're filled with fog and clouds and stuff like that in the summer. And the fog was coming in and was rolling through, and I saw these clouds passing by. And I realized that my despair and my depression and my suicidal thought were only temporary, and they were very similar to the clouds passing me by. Even though the sun was obfuscated behind it, the sun was always there, always shining, always present, and all I had to do was kind of wait for the weather to pass. And it was in that moment that I decided that day to do everything differently. I realized that if I needed things to change, I needed to change everything, and that I had been living my life in the matrix, in the program, and chasing things that every buddy and thing and society told me would bring me happiness, but actually didn't stem from my intrinsic joy. And so that day, with this suicidal thought just snapped me out of my reality. And I said, fuck it. And I went to the beach and I said,
Nice.
I'm going to do something differently. Canceled all my meetings. And I went to the beach, not to just hang and relax, but to, San Francisco beaches are not like Southern California beaches like we have in, your mind. It's a little more stormy and a little colder and all that. It was very reflective. And I went to this beach called Baker Beach. And I sat there and I looked out at the sunset, and I realized that sunsets brought me so much joy. And I used to watch them as a kid and growing up. But somewhere along the lines, I got too busy to invest that few minutes into watching and slowing down. And I was caught up in the hustle and the grind culture. And I started to cry. And I realized that I had been so disconnected from the things that brought me joy, truly me joy, not what society said, that I had been spending all my time chasing other things and programs and what I told would make me happy, and then didn't, that I had disconnected from the root of what actually brought me joy. And so I sat there and I made what I now call my list of joy. And that list of joy, it's an annual exercise that I do. Really, I kind of do it every 6 months. But it's all the things that are rooted in that make me smile from the inside out. And so when you think back to a memory as a child or some experience, you go, wow, that was amazing. That's the joy. And as I started to make this list of joy, I realized that I was totally and utterly removed from anything that brought me joy. And it was no wonder I had been so depressed, because the things that actually brought me joy, I wasn't investing in. And so it took me a minute, but after I got through about 5 or 6 items, the list came to about 20 or so. And I realized I wasn't doing any one thing on them. And so I made a promise to myself that day, 5 years ago, that I would invest into joy every single day for the rest of my life. And what has happened is that, and there's more to this we can get into, but what has happened is that as I have been intentionally focusing on investing in my daily joy, small and big pieces, it has become a compounding effect over time. And that return on joy, when I call that ROJ, that return on joy has created beauty and happiness and hope and optimism and financial success and love success and friend success. And it has been this compounding phenomenon that I call the paradox of the universe, which is the more that I actually slowed down and reconnected with my joy is the moment my dreams came true. And it's not a life where I live every day. I just wake up so joyful. It's a practice, just like meditation or yoga or anything, of practicing focusing on the things that bring you joy, because what you focus on expands. And as I've done that list of 20 now 5 years later is about 180 things long, and they're not big things. It could be, I live in the mountains, right? It could be fresh fallen snow. And so when it's a busy, crazy day and work from home and oh my God, so much going on and you have stress, if it's snowing outside, just taking that minute to look out the window and being like, wow, that's beautiful. And remembering that brings you joy. And what happens is that these little moments start to grow and expand and make the adversity a little less difficult. And as you come up against adversity, you start to realize over time that adversity is typically comes from something that you invested in early on that wasn't joyful in some way, shape, or form, or ignored. And when you get there to that adversity point, we all have it. It's not an overnight thing. It's not, it didn't just happen instantaneously. Right. Usually it was building, or a lot of series of events brought into it. And then when you're there, you start to realize actually that the adversity is the polarity of life. And the polarity of life, in the duality, we have night, we have day, we have positive electrons, we have negative electrons, we have adversity, we have joy. And so as we go through adversity and we kind of remove ourselves like I did that day from the clouds passing by, and separate the adversity from my self understanding of who I am. I am not a depressed person. I'm feeling depression at this moment. Therefore, I can separate myself from the two. And as I do that, I start to realize that adversity or hardships become seedlings for future joy.
Wow.
because those are the learning lessons. Those are the moments, like when you physically work out, you break down your muscles and feel the lactic acid and the soreness, and that makes you stronger. That's the physical process. But we don't think about that emotionally because we're in it. It freaking sucks. And the negativity bias and the pain avoidance side of our brain, of our reptilian brain, wants us to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah.
But these adversity moments actually become these seedlings that grow the acorns into the oak tree of the joy of life. If you go inward and you learn the lessons and you evolve, what I call the upward spiral, you evolve out of them. So you try not to make those same mistakes twice. So yes, I have been through many different smaller and large examples of adversity, but that moment standing on the top of my building, not on the physical top, but looking out my window, wondering if I should continue on, was a very dark moment, a dark Tuesday morning of the soul, so to speak. And what I have built of reconnecting with the things that brought me joy, and then the daily investments into that. And then I have a whole framework that I've kind of built on top of it over time that has helped a lot of people as well as myself. And it's kind of like fundamentals of footwork of any sport. It's like when you need to get, like, playing basketball or whatever, football, base, doesn't matter. Your fundamentals, your footwork, your hand, what happens there, you go back to that when you are in need of kind of getting back to center. And these fundamentals help you kind of push you through the adversity and gain perspective to get back into more of a homeostasis. And so a long-winded answer to your question. So yes, I have experienced it. I still do, right? I still do come up against adversity and hard times and challenges. And what I find is that actually removing myself and getting more of that white space, I get more clarity. I get out of the high beta brainwaves, analysis paralysis, and get into more of a space where I can actually look at a problem with more perspective. And, Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it.
Right. Right. Exactly. I mean, I absolutely adore what you just said around kind of those small things and the list of joy that you're making. I have a magazine that I read called Bella Grace, which, if anyone's out there, it's a beautiful magazine, wonderful illustrations, and they come out every year with a book of lists. And the thing is a lot of the lists in there are the simple things that you're saying. And I think people forget, like you said, freshly fallen snow, the things in everyday life, crisp sheets or clean sheets when you lay down on them, if I go to the beach, the stillness of the water, if I'm just looking at it, or just these things that come into your everyday life. Because I think sometimes, especially when I instruct clients or I talk to people about start gratitude lists, start joy lists, they think they have to be these gigantic, big things. And I think what you're saying is the secret is it's actually the things that are in your day-to-day life that keep you balanced. So when adversity hits, it's not going to take away the freshly fallen snow. It's not going to take away those things. And it also kind of, for me, when I hear you say that, it reminds me that there's always going to be hope, right?
Yes.
Because those small things don't go away regardless of the adversity. And then also, thank you for saying to separate, the emotion from the person. I actually hear that a lot in terms of little kids, because I have them over here. It's not to say like I'm bad or I'm sad. It's, I'm experiencing sadness or I feel sadness, right? Because we identify so strongly with those emotions. And props to you, friend, for having that moment in the building, because I know damn well people are listening, and there are probably plenty who have had that thought, myself included, on those really rough moments where you just want to say, fuck it, I'm out.
Yeah. And that's, as the more that I've shared my story openly, obviously when you first share a story like that, there's a vulnerability bit of like, should I share this and all, and then for me, it's like you said, it's fuck it. Like I'm put here on this earth to create impact in the world. And by sharing my story, the more I did research, 20% of the United States, 20% suffers from clinical depression, which is, clinical depression. When you get to entrepreneurs, it goes up to about 30%, a little bit more than 30%. But when you start to really drill into entrepreneurs, we have a depressed thought, a very serious depressed thought, over 60% of us at least once a week, right? Because we're living this manic high highs, low lows life of like sometimes in the same hour, let alone the same day, right? Where you can have the best things ever happen to you, and then the worst thing, oh crap, what do I do? And so I used to be a very anxiously focused operator, and it stems from being anxiously attached in my attachment style. lifestyle. And what I realized is that, you can't separate that from your work. It's just who you are. And so as you bring that into adversity, I wanted to solve problems right now, right here, and get them done. And I ended up making, like, grasping at sand, ended up making them worse and making them bigger.
Yes.
And then I'd focus on those problems and they would ruminate. I'd go downward spiral, and it would take me up. And I would have, there were several times I thought I was having heart attacks in the age of 30, and so went and got all of the tests run, and they're like, no, dude, you're fine. You're just really stressed, right?
Yeah.
And so the more that I've learned about neuroscience and our body, and meditation, right? And I'm not like a sit cross-legged, say, kind of meditator, right? But now my meditation practice ranges anywhere from 30 minutes a day to 90 minutes. And I used to not be able to even sit down and have 5 minutes of it because I have ADD and dyslexia and anxiety and all that, all those things. And the more that I've kind of gone into my meditation practice, it was for me kind of connecting two worlds between neuroscience, East meets West, to understand what's happening in my brain when you get calm and still, and when you separate yourself from what you're feeling. You are not that emotion, you are not that experience, and how to kind of get into that state. And it's really fascinating. So, we have different brain waves of when we sleep, delta all the way up to beta, which is consciousness. And as you're in theta, which is kind of your hypnotic state, and then alpha, which is your creative state when you're kind of in flow, and then beta is your high consciousness. And in beta, there's three different kind of low, medium, and high. Low is like, hey, we're talking, we're engaged. Medium's like, oh, I'm going to be tested on this, I should pay attention, right? And then high beta is fight, flight, freeze. And when we're in high beta, everyone feels it differently, but you usually feel it somewhere in your body. It's usually a rush of adrenaline, and it's cortisol spiking through and through. And we did that to be able to run from predators, out on the savannah and have us evolve and survive. But when it's an email from a colleague or a client, or when it's a Slack notification, I mean, we have so many things pinging at us at all different times that we end up living our lives in this high stress. And so kind of bringing it back to your adversity question, there's two different types of stress. There's eustress, eustress, and then there's distress, right? And when you have distress, you can have acute distress, which, I'm running from this predator, I'm safe, let me run away, or big problem at work, okay, we solved it, back to normal, right? And then there's chronic stress. Chronic stress over time leads to disease, dis-ease. It leads to problems in our bodies, cortisol running through, leads to all the challenges that we don't realize have a massive effect on our short and long-term health. And so as you're dealing with adversity, I think the practice is, there's a lot of tools out there to help us really help us process adversity. But the first thing that I found to be the most important is to get some space.
Yes, agreed.
And the anxiety in me wants to solve the problem right away, right? Some people want to avoid it. Some people want to solve it. Some people are like, okay, I can give it space and time. But the best thing is give it a little space. Give it a space to breathe. Sometimes that's only a couple minutes. I'm going to write the email and I tap on my keyboard, all caps, blah, 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 save as draft, take the new person away, and then come back and reread it when I come down. Or sometimes it's like, okay, do I need to solve it today, or can I give it a night? And pulling yourself away to be able to come out of that high beta. That could be going for a walk, that could be cuddling with a pet or your kids, or it could just be going into, watching something on television to kind of remove you from it. It's why a lot of ideas are sparked in the shower, right? Or when you're going for a walk.
All the time. Yep.
Right.
You're not in high beta. Agreed. Like you're just like hanging out, right? And if you don't allow that space to come in and you don't consciously make it, the things won't come. I see that all the time with clients where they're like, why isn't it coming? I'm like, because you can't force it. You can't just be like, hey, creativity, let me schedule you to come in between 10 and 11 today. Like, that's not how that works.
But what you can do, you're absolutely right. I 1000% agree with that. But you can do, and I actually do this in my calendar, I schedule white space.
Yes, exactly.
I used to have back to back. Now I schedule white space. And the white space for me, you have a biological prime time of when you think most creatively. I try to put it in my biological prime time. For me, it's like 9 a.m. till about 1 p.m. Right. And I try to put it in there. And if not, it's in the afternoons. Right. And I put it in there, and it's usually a 2-hour period. And the initial side of things made me think, oh, I don't have time for this. I need to go solve. I need to do. And that's the entrepreneur. And I was like, we got to solve it. But actually, white space is creating, it is thinking, it's how we come up with revelations of how to skate to the puck. It's how we remove ourselves from having to solve challenges that are in adversity. It's what I did that day at the beach. I just removed myself, and I got white space. So there is I think there's something really, really important piece here, going back to that adversity, is there's a toxicity in the hustle and grind culture around entrepreneurship.
Just thinking that exact same thing. So thank you. Good segue. I was thinking
right?
the same concept.
Yeah. And so, when you look at the Gary V's of the world and some of these folks out there that say you need to rise and grind and hustle and outwork, it's not that he's wrong in the sense that you need to work hard. Or I'm using him as a proxy for that, kind of like that culture. It is that there is a better way to do it, to work smarter. In the end, if you hustle, grind, make the money, get there, and you get to the end and you have all the things, but none of the stuff that actually brings you joy, what does it fucking matter?
Exactly.
So there is no destination. We aren't promised a destination. It is all about the journey. The journey is the destination. And so if we can find joy along the way, when we get quote unquote there, it'll be even more joyful, because the things and people and experiences that are around us will be bringing us joy all along the way. And if we don't get there, we enjoyed the journey. There's no downside. It's recentering.
And I think there's something to be said about almost an addiction to that high beta wave too, right? Like your body, I've seen a lot of people, and myself included actually, because I went through very similar things that you described with like, I'm having a heart attack. Oh wait, it's just my entire nervous system is on crack basically. So, but I think there is, yes, absolutely that hustle grind mentality, but then there is something to be said about when you're so used to being in a high beta that the opposite feels more threatening than the high beta does, right? Can you speak a little bit to that? I think you probably understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. 100%. So your body becomes addicted to being stressed. And what that means is it's so used to having that cortisol reacting. And so what happens is that as we go back to the brainwave side of things, as we develop until about the age of 12, 13 in that range, we actually start to kind of work our way up on the brainwave cycle. So when we're like 0 to 2, 3 in that range, we're in delta. We're basically in sleeping state. That's why we don't remember a lot when we're that young. We don't have those other brainwaves. Our brain hasn't grown. And then we kind of move into theta, and then we move into alpha. And that's why kids, young kids are always playing, and they're so present in that moment in their teacups or in their imaginary friend, because they're not thinking in quote unquote high consciousness. They're just in the imaginary world, right? And then we get to about 10, 11, 12, but that's when stress kicks in. That's when our physical brain starts to develop and expand and have these brain waves. And then over time, until about the age of our mid 30s, the learned behavior and how we act and how we respond to things becomes hardwired. Yeah. And right around your mid 30s, around the age of 35, your habits, your behaviors kind of become who you are and become your personality and become how you react and respond. And all your mirror neurons, meaning how you've seen in the world and your parents and your family, they start to become hardwired. And hardwired in the sense that they are the default reactions, the default responses, the default mechanisms. And that also then becomes how we learn how to deal with stress. And your body is like, okay, this stimulus this is how we deal with it. It doesn't mean it's good for you. This is how we deal with it. Exactly. And it becomes used to just reacting and responding in a way because that's the pathway. And so as we get into our mid 30s, we actually have to be very, very, very conscious of then rewiring it. And rewiring it takes a couple different things. Rewiring it takes practice. It takes intention. It takes understanding the neurological networks on it. Psychedelic therapy is doing a brilliant amount of work in this.
They are. Yep.
On the psilocybin front and on the MDMA therapy front, to be able to rewire pathways. In that realm, there's talk therapy. I mean, there's all sorts of different modalities that you can use, meditation, right? All that kind of stuff. But your body becomes physically addicted to how you are learned and reacting, not because it's good for you, but because that has been the learned habitual behavior. Right. Exactly. And so we actually have to break that addiction and retrain the organism that is our body. Remember, we separated our mind from our body. We're not our body, right? It's feeling something. We have to retrain it like an animal in some fashion, right? To be able to say, oh, yep, typically you'd get really fucking pissed at this thing happen and you would react right? And Viktor Frankl, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, one of the best books of all time. If you listeners haven't read it, it is the one of the most life-changing books you can ever read. He was a Jewish psychologist that went through Auschwitz in World War II, lost all his family and friends and all of his dignity and everything, survived, and then wrote this wonderful book of recounting it. Very emotional read, but beautiful. And in essence, all he says in that book is what he built his rest of his life on, is that you can be stripped of everything in your life, possessions and dignity and all this, but the only thing you cannot be stripped of that you have sovereignty over is the space between stimulus and response.
Yes. And
that space, that gap between the stimulus and response becomes something that we have to relearn and teach as we become adults and we awaken ourselves to, oh crap, like that's not my higher self. That's a fragment. That's fear. That's anger. That's not how I want to show up in the world. But I'm so used to reacting that way that I need to now consciously retrain. And how to retrain that, part of that is getting back to what brings you joy. Part of that is trying new things, creating white space, trying to go doing some meditation, downloading Headspace or Calm, right? Getting on YouTube. There's a ton of free meditations, right? All the way through to psychedelic therapy that is having insane positive results.
Oh my goodness, the documentary that just came out too on Netflix. I can't wait to watch on all of that. I love it.
How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. If you want to really read a mind expanding book, no pun intended, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. I think they just did a Netflix series on it as well. Talking about why these substances have been, shunned in our society, and then what the actual science is behind them when used in the right way. I'm not talking about party, I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about
in a clinical setting of some sort with that. Yeah. So, I mean, I am loving everything that you're saying, and I couldn't agree more. Because I think, like, to your point, there is that. I love that you brought it back to that space between right before you react, right? Because I say that all the time, is that is the only thing you can control. And you can be in the shittiest of circumstances. And I reference Holocaust survivors too, because I don't know, that's pretty much like a very shitty circumstance, right? Like
doesn't get more shitty than that.
Right. So, I mean, I absolutely adore what you're saying. And I do want to switch lanes a little bit, because I want to talk philanthropreneurship with you, because I love that word. Good job on that. I want to talk about what you view and how you view it's possible to actually make money and give back, because I hear it a lot and people are very skeptical of it. So I'd love to hear it from you on that.
So it actually really is, it's a good segue from what we were just talking about. I mentioned earlier that there is no destination, and that the journey is the destination. And so if you take a look at the traditional philanthropic models, the Rockefellers and and all of those out there, that you make billions of dollars, millions of dollars, and then you give back. You have so much, you then give back, and you have this. That's how philanthropy was born, and also as a part of tax strategy and tax reduction. There's all like let's not be silly about this.
But Rich Dad Poor Dad type stuff. If you haven't read that book,
right? So totally right. So how to optimize your tax bracket, and so when you take a look at the traditional philanthropic model, right? I looked at that and said, man, there's got to be a better way to do this. From the beginning. If there is no destination, what happens if I never make the money? What happens if I never get there? What happens if I die? I don't want to wait till that one day. I want that one day to be 2 day.
Nice.
And so I started looking early on. One of my first businesses failed. I was in the commodities world, import, export randomly. And I saw all the people making the physical money and had all amazing things, but they didn't have the one thing that I was seeking, which was to make an impact in the world. And so when that business failed, I started an online marketplace for socially conscious brands. And I started looking around at the world, seeing these amazing social entrepreneurs using their businesses to embed cause into their cogs, right? So, and I said, that's exactly what I want to do. And so I created like an Etsy style marketplace. That business, again, also failed. Talk about adversity and growth and stepping stones, but we learned a lot. And I dedicated my life, this is about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, to saying, how do I embed social good into the DNA of my business, starting from how I treat and set up my company and employees, all the way through to how we give back in the world. And for me, it's just a no-brainer. It's not a nice to have, it's a must-have.
Great.
Because I want to feel good about the things that I do and the people I work with. And I want to make a difference as I go, because I'm not promised the end. And, I think for me that started, my mom, my birth mom died when I was 6.5 from cancer. And so from an early age, I learned this the hard way. A lot of people haven't seen or dealt with that kind of stuff from an early age. And so they just think, oh, I'm going to one day I'll get, if you don't do it now, you'll never do it when you get there. And so, I'm on a mission in my kind of like macro career to really prove to the world that you can make an impact in the world, and you can make a difference in the world as you go. And in fact, I think the only way we save, quote unquote, the world, right, and our environment and all the things that are going on around us is by harnessing the most powerful economic engine, which is business. It's not, when you think about teach a person to fish versus give them a fish. When you look at the traditional nonprofit model, it's all about give them fish. And I'm on the board, I'm chairman of the board of a nonprofit, and you have, and that's fine, because that works with some donor relations, and you once you get to a certain size, you can make that happen. But what if from the beginning, every single company in the planet donated 1% of their profits into something that gave back, or even better yet, used their business to make the environment, to take care of their team, to give them great healthcare, right? I've recently been watching on the sidelines as a family member, distant family members navigating the HMO world. And it's just so devastating, where my company from the beginning, we have at Stealth Venture Labs provided 100% of health, vision, and dental for our employees and their dependents, the best PPO money can buy, because when you are in distress with your health, the last thing you need to be worrying about is a committee who makes a decision and then comes down and it's wrong and then you appeal. And what healthcare should I, go after? Or can I afford this? Can I not? You should never have to choose between your health and money. And so when it starts about social good, for me, it's about embedding it into how you operate as a business, all the way out to, could be teaching, it could be building wells on the ground in Africa, whatever you're passionate about. And so the term philanthropreneur for me is really just a mindset. I started an organization when I was in college called the Philanthropreneur Society. And it was just all about how do we use business to create impact? How do we harness these engines and embed cause into our cogs, so that as we scale our profitability, so does our impact. And that's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. And, I'm just going to be blunt. It's not that fucking hard, people. Like, it is and it isn't, right? I understand, because the operational person in me is the scalability of it all and all that, right? Like, that's the business head. And I can hear people with established business or enterprise level businesses saying, well, we can't go backwards like that, and the amount of resources it takes. But if you are an entrepreneur and you are starting, like, to your point, you just factor it into the business plan.
Yeah. And I would even challenge that. Like, so it starts with a what and a why.
Yes, agreed.
And if those are compelling and strong enough, the how becomes just a matter of semantics of blocking and tackling.
Yes.
A good example of that is about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we started realizing we had a lot of people kind of in the family building range, and we're like, oh, we really need to come up with a parental leave policy. And I looked at it and I said, okay, not like, how do we do this and that and the other, or what are the other people doing? I said, what is the right thing to do for parents that are new? And why does that matter? And I said, the right thing is to give the maximum amount of free, focused energy and time as they bring a human life into this world, so they can be present and create other good humans, right? And why does that matter? Because when I have children, that's what I'm going to want, and that's what I believe is going to create a long tail ripple effect in this world. And you shouldn't have to choose again between your job and your children who are 4 months old. And so we said, okay, what and why is we're going to create an industry leading parental leave plan. And why? Because it matters for parents to be present at their children's earliest days with their spouses and with their partners and whatever it may be. And so that became the compelling call to action. And then the how was like, well, shit, how do we pay for this? How do we figure this out? We're not venture backed, right? We are service business, and it's self-funded. and we already pay a ton of money every month on healthcare. But how do we make this work? And so we said, well, the what and why is so compelling enough for us to do this. Let's have a policy that meets and beats Google and what they do. So we provide 4 months of 100% paid parental leave. Doesn't matter who you are, what your gender, your orientation is, your sexuality, doesn't matter. 100% paid parental leave for 4 months with an optional 5th month in there if you want it as well, so that parents can be present. And then we said, well, how the hell do we make this work financially? That's where we went into crunching numbers to say, okay, is there an organization where we can buy an insurance premium that can help us make sure that we pay on this? And we pay more every month, but when this comes in, we can make it work financially. And so it requires intention and a passion and a strong what and why from leadership. There's always a how. There's always a how. And so with those enterprise clients, it sometimes can be scary because we think that it's going to take away from profitability. Or it's going to take away from quarterly earnings, or it's going to take away from those things. But that's such a short-term myopic view to a long-term race that is business. And so, yes, when you're dealing with bigger bureaucracies and all that, it may be you need to eat the elephant one bite at a time in some ways. But even at the early stage entrepreneur, it just requires an unwavering intention to create that, and realize that you're going to be on an island. You're going to look around. There's not going to be a lot of people thinking like you are. There's so many other pathways that say, no, this is more financially, makes more sense. And you're just gonna have to stay the course. And so one of the things we're working on as we speak is benchmarking this data and releasing some white papers in the upcoming years, a longitudinal study of what these practices have done to our top and bottom line, our retention, our client satisfaction, right? All of these items to say, look, here's the case. It is good for business to do these things. And short term, you might say, oh, wow, we can't afford another N amount a month in insurance premiums. That doesn't make any sense. But when you have a person going on parental leave, what you can't afford is that person, leaving or feeling pissed off or socially taking them away from their, So anyways, I'm on my soapbox.
No, it's okay. I like it. I like where your soapbox is, friend, because my business model is keeping the personal in business, right? So, and constantly looking at that things, but to your point, it's about playing the long game. And I think, people get there's a lot of pressure, especially in the large companies, you have to hit your quarterly goals, you have to hit the this, the that. But if you have a leader who, to your point, is staying the course and who understands that the intent is to play that long game in employee retention and all of the amazing things that you just listed off, then it makes it easier. And it also gives everyone around you something to buy into when you have that why, because the how people aren't necessarily buying into. It's not as sexy. It's not as like,
if you start with the how, you can have all the players saying, oh, listen, you can't do it. So what I always ask people when they get into that mode is, tell me how I can do it. So I hear you've given me all the reasons why, and now I can't. Now let's just dream. Tell me how. What would have to happen? Oh, well, we would have to find an insurance company that covers this, and there's none out there. Oh, okay. Have we searched? Have we really searched? Exactly. Oh, turns out there is. Right. The parental leave company that we use that we pay a premium into for insurance that covers our policy is called Parento. Right? Use it. I highly encourage everybody who wants to provide industry-leading parental leave policies that can make some financial sense for everybody. Parento is the insurance firm that we use to help us make this a smart business decision while the right social decision. Yeah. So there is if the what and the why are compelling enough, there's always a how.
Right. And when all else fails, folks, we're entrepreneurs. If there's a hole in the market, fill the hole, folks. Right?
I was saying when we were searching for this, and if we didn't find that I was like,
because somebody needs it, right? If everyone is sitting around a table saying we need this, chances are you're not alone in that, folks. Right? Exactly. So do the entrepreneurial thing when all else fails, right?
I think, one looping thought I had here before we kind of move on to the next question is leadership is not about being liked.
Thank you. Yes.
I was, I fell beholden to this during kind of early years of my career. As a leader, oftentimes you want to be liked. Yeah. Leadership is about leading the way through the night in dark times when people don't see that the sun is going to rise on the other side, and you can give them the path, and you can have the courage to go through the dark and run full speed into the dark. And sometimes that means pushing the envelopes for what is right. And some, when you go on the extreme end of leadership, you can get into martyrdom, right? Right. And that side of things. And we're not talking about becoming a martyr and dying on the, on the cross, so to speak. What we're talking about is leading for what's right for the next generation of businesses from the inside out, whether you're an entrepreneur, a manager, a director, an executive, pushing the envelope in the ways that may not always make you liked, but is the right decision. And I think that's the true test of leadership.
Yes. I'm a big fan I'm certified in daring leadership with Brene Brown and all different things like that. And it's a completely different way generationally to be looking at leadership, rather than kind of that old school model of like, I lead, you follow, and all of those. It's much more in line with maybe servant leadership, or however you want to call it, but just it's human leadership. It's understanding that there are humans involved and we are dealing with human problems. So there would not necessarily be black and white solves and so on and so forth.
And all these big enterprise companies out there, the majority of them were created in our parents' or our parents' generations, not, and so what you're seeing is actually like the operating model is a relic of the past, not a projection into the future. And so all of our younger entrepreneurs that are creating the right models are going to become the status quo, because as most of the companies on the S&P 500 weren't around 100 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. Right. And so when you look at some of the bigger ones, even ones, they're never going to go away. Right. Look at BlackBerry, look at, Nokia, look at something. It's like, things change in the world. And so it's our responsibility as entrepreneurs to be the crazy ones, to be the rebels, to see the world differently.
Be the innovators. Right? To be the innovators, right. And see everything from a different perspective, and to be constantly challenging, right. Every norm. Just because it says it's how it's always been done doesn't mean it needs to be continued.
In fact, when it says it's how it's always been done, that's where you're like, there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity.
Exactly. I'm like, oh, yikes. Yeah. All right. Well, do you have any kind of final thoughts? You've given so many incredible points here that I'm on board with your friend all the way. But any kind of final thoughts to wrap it up here?
And I feel like you and I could chat forever and ever. I think that for your listeners on this, my biggest final thought is just my experience share is that no matter where you are in your journey, I would highly recommend taking a quick step back to create that white space and create that list of joy. And the way that I recommend doing that is by finding some white space in a space that makes you happy. It could be in your house or in nature or, on a trip or wherever. And write down things that make you smile from the inside out. And go back to think back to your childhood memory, think back to, a happy memory when you were a kid. And typically that's the feeling and emotion you're looking for. It doesn't need to be a long list, but just the things that make you smile. And look at those things and say, how can I do one thing from this every single day? And for me, Italy is my passion and happy place. And so, for me, it's like, if Italy's my happy or passion place, there's so many different offshoots of that. It's Italian cooking, speaking Italian, and all these different things. It could just be watching an Italian document. There's so many little things that you can do that are a small daytime investment or nighttime investment into your list of joy, because the compounding effects of that over time, that return on joy is just exponential happiness. And it is a Moore's law curve, right? At first slow and then quick. And so the number one thing I recommend is people just taking that step back from their day-to-day lives, connecting with that joy, because what it does is it removes you from high beta, brings you into alpha, and then you start to get, oh, wow, I'm not doing it. Okay, how can I go in that direction? And then over time, add to that list. And as little things pop up, add to it, build on it. And then all of a sudden, what you focus on expands. Your list of joy becomes this beautiful thing where, like you said, fresh, clean, crisp sheets is a joyful thing to lie, to lie in bed. It could be just that fresh feeling of that pillow. Could be cuddling with your kids or your dogs or your spouse or your partner in the morning, whatever it may be. So invest in joy.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Can you please tell people where they can find more of you, friend?
Yeah. So Brent Freeman. .me is my website, and my company is Stealth Venture Labs. We are an e-commerce marketing brand and incubator and nonprofit that teaches it to low-income kids in the US. StealthVentureLabs.com, or on Instagram, Brent_Freeman. And those are kind of the best places. And I'm in the process of starting to write a book and put all this stuff together kind of slowly over the next couple of years. And so not all this content is published yet, but I'm happy to share and connect with anyone who reaches out.
Wonderful. And if I'm still doing this podcast and that book comes out, you're coming back because we have more to talk about, friend. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. This was an absolute pleasure.
Michelle. It was wonderful being here.